From the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network studios in Des Moines, this is Iowa Ag Matters. I'm Riley Smith. In today's show, Dustin talks with Sigrid Johannes of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Mark visits with Shayle Stewart of DTN, and we discuss the latest trade news updates with China. Now let's welcome in our hosts, Mark Magnuson and Dustin Huffman.
Well, Dustin, another edition of Iowa Ag Matters as we start off the week. And once again, there is a lot to talk about on the show. Of course, we're coming off of the summit with President Trump visiting China and speaking with the president of China, Xi Jinping. And this is another instance that we often see when it comes to these discussions, these deals, quote unquote, with China, where we get some of the details. They kind of trickle out over time, but we don't ever really get the full picture or any of the specifics at a given time. It doesn't seem like we kind of have to piece the puzzle together. And that does seem to be where we stand here today. But at least to start the day, it would appear that the ag marketplace taking this as good news as we see the markets moving mostly to the upside in the grains. And there was some good news as well on the beef side when you look at the ag marketplace. Could be a little bit brought back down, though, by the news that we might be importing more beef out of Argentina. So it could be some offsetting news there. But overall, it sounds like a positive result to the trip to China with President Trump in those discussions as it regards ag trade.
Yeah, that it was, and we'll get into more details later on in the program. And of course, as you mentioned, details trickling in. It would have been nice to have gotten those details sooner before the markets took a nosedive on Thursday and Friday, though Friday wasn't quite as bad. But we did get some good news, and we'll pass those numbers along. And of course, the downside of this, and we've talked about this before, Mark, is the fact that there's no way to enforce this. As of right now, there's not an actual signed agreement. These are just handshake agreements. So if China decides not to do something or America decides not to do something, there's no way anybody can enforce it and say, hey, they violated a trade agreement, because there's really nothing put to paper. And that can be definitely a tough situation when it looks to enforcement as well. But again, we'll get into those topics a little later on. Of course, eyes are on the weather here today. We had a little bit of a rainy weekend. I know over in Ankeny, we got about 0.4 of an inch. I know Des Moines reporting about 0.3 there as well. Today is when we're supposed to be getting today and tonight, we're supposed to be when we start to really get the worst of the 3 days of rain and shower activity. Of course, this heat and humidity, definitely summer-like, but we're, of course, less than a month away, or about a month away till summer, a little over a month away, I should say. But, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. And as we talked about in Profit Matters earlier today, the situation is the weather patterns are changing, but it's a slow transition from La Nina to El Nino. And so we've heard from Brad Rippey about that earlier programs. But, yeah, definitely a interesting couple of days we've had. I know, Mark, you've been kind of out of the circle here on vacation during the E15 situation and whether or not we were going to have a trade deal or not. And there's been a lot going on, and it's starting right off where it left off on Friday.
That is certainly the case. And back to your point about the weather and the rainfall that we've received, it is really, really striking when you pull up the U.S. Drought Monitor and you just see the state of Iowa basically dealing with very little in the way of drought or even low soil moisture. I mean, there's that one very small pocket in extreme northwest Iowa, but other than that, we're in pretty good shape. And Dustin, as it relates to the news that has happened since I've been out of the office, you were keeping me up to speed on E15, and that, of course, passed through the House, the E15 legislation for year-round E15. And just your gut feeling, what is kind of the landscape going into the Senate?
There are some who are optimistic. There are some who are pessimistic. I'm right now on the fence. I think anything is completely possible. I could see this bill being defeated before it even starts. I could see it being hijacked to get a farm bill across the board for those who are more into the nutrition titles of it. I see it going overwhelmingly bipartisan. I see it going absolutely nowhere. Like I said, anything is completely possible. Let's go ahead and get into the markets as Mark talks with Teddy Tarvis of Allendale.
Joined today by Teddy Tarvis of Allendale for the opening market discussion. Teddy, what's happening with the trade in the grains here to start the week?
For having me. Yeah, so a lot of we have some news that came out just yesterday. The White House announced that we have $17 billion, billion with a B, of new purchase agreements from China. Now we're still looking at trying to get a little bit more detail out of it, but essentially it's agricultural goods, but they didn't really list anything too specific. So Secretary Brooke Rollins, she did put out a tweet just after saying that U.S. poultry is sort of back on the table, U.S. beef also back on the menu. China is renewing some of their licenses for 400 beef facilities, but on the grains, you got corn that is up 15 cents right now. Soybeans are up about 30, and then the wheat is up 20. So a lot of excitement here, but still looking to get some details out of the agreements if we can. So hopefully it's not one of those things where it's buy the rumor and sell the facts. But right now, yeah, a lot of excitement. Things are green on the screen. So we'll have to see if we can get those details maybe by the end of the day or at some point this week. But that is where things are at for right now.
And speaking of those details, it seems like almost any time there's even a semblance of good news in talks with China, we see that soybean price just jump up. And as you mentioned, the details not exactly specific, but do we know anything about soybeans in particular? Were they a major focus of the discussion?
So that was the thing that it was announced on Friday that Trump basically said farmers are going to love the soybean purchases and agreements that we have. But now looking at the headline that came out, it just says agricultural goods from the U.S. So you would assume that is including soybeans, but again, don't have that specific detail there, which is, I think, what we need to see. Because if there is a large purchase agreement on the beans, there is a good chance that they can keep going higher here. But until we see that, maybe we go and retest some highs. But, still fundamentally things are, there's a lot of beans out there. Planting is going extremely well. And you have this sort of dark cloud that is South America. And the crop down there is looking pretty good as of right now. So just something to keep in mind.
Every county fair has that special person or family. They are there before the gates open and long after the lights go out, helping families with projects and pitching in wherever they're needed, never asking for recognition. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, along with Wiffles Hybrids, is honoring them with the Heart of the County Fair Award. 6 winners will be recognized locally and at the Iowa State Fair, with a plaque, cash prize, VIP passes, and food coupons. Don't delay. Nominations are due June 1st. Visit iowaagnet.com to nominate today.
Well, we're back on Iowa Ag Matters, and we've been keeping a lot of eyes on this cattle market. It has been very high, and for those who are cow-calf operations, they're making a lot of money. But the latest Cattle on Feed report may have some interesting numbers in it. Mark had a chance to talk with Shayle Stewart of DTN.
April's USDA Cattle on Feed report provided a breakdown of steers and heifers on feed, with heifers falling to 37% of the total on-feed inventory. Typically, this is the initial signaling of herd rebuilding. Shayle Stewart, a livestock market analyst with DTN, says that 37% is more of a neutral number in terms of heifers falling to 37% of the total on-feed inventory in the April Cattle on Feed report. Says does not indicate expansion or contraction of the herd.
Seeing that quarterly number at 37% was just kind of a neutral factor. I believe that there are pockets in the U.S. where we are seeing some minor rebuilding occur. But I also believe that we are seeing, and we will continue to see in the weeks ahead, if we do not get the moisture that we desperately need, we will see whether it be young cows let go, less desirable stock let go, or, just the liquidation of some older cows, to maybe hit that hamburger market. But really, I'm not comfortable saying that the herd has truly began to be rebuilt yet.
There are many market factors that are weighing on the cattle industry and could erase any signs of the herd rebuilding, says Stewart.
I believe we're in a neutral phase just simply because we don't have enough positive factors to push the cycle into growth mode. There are areas where that is indicative and where that is possible, but to say that the entire industry is doing so is not something that I think anybody would step out and say, just because there are too many external factors that weigh against the marketplace at this time. We have the war in Iran, we have fuel prices too high, interest rates are not low. We do not know what's going to happen in regards to drought this summer. Feed prices in regards to the corn complex, they look like they're going to be relatively affordable, but you know what? Time changes things. It was minuscule enough to where if we take the numbers in full perspective, we will be able to understand the story. Now, depending on drought and the ramifications of feedlot placement, numbers might be a little skewed because it's really two different worlds. Comparing the market of 2025 to the early market of 2026, they're different scenarios. Our border is not reopened right now. We might be placing some cattle in feedlots more aggressively early this spring just because we don't have the option of green grass as much as we did even just a year ago. So I think that we need to be careful. And if there is a variation in the typical data scheme, to look and say why.
Hi, my name is Ethan Smith, and I've been a certified crop advisor in Iowa for about 6 years. The Iowa CCA program is valuable to me because it helps keep me informed on new topics and research around the industry, including soils, insects, diseases, and much more. It's also a great way to network with others around the state and beyond. Iowa is known for its crops, and that's why we're here. To learn more about becoming a certified crop advisor, visit iowacca.org.
Every county fair has that special person or family. They are there before the gates open and long after the lights go out, helping families with projects and pitching in wherever they're needed, never asking for recognition. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, along with Wiffles Hybrids, is honoring them with the Heart of the County Fair Award. 6 winners will be recognized locally and at the Iowa State Fair, with a plaque, cash prize, VIP passes, and food coupons. Don't delay. Nominations are due June 1st. Visit iowaagnet.com to nominate today.
Time to run down those basis numbers for you here on Iowa Ag Matters on this Monday. I'm Dustin Huffman. Taking a look at cash bids around the state, only 3 elevators making any kind of price changes. Let's run them down. ADM Burlington 12 cents under on corn, $4.57. Soybeans 20 cents under, $11.79. Cargill and Eddyville 22 cents under on corn, $4.47 for the cash bid. New Co-op Algona 38 cents under on corn, $4.31. Soybeans 60 cents under, cash price $11.39. Ag State Sheldon, they are 30 cents under on corn, $4.39. Soybeans 65 cents under at $11.34. Ag State Delta 35 cents under on corn, cash price $4.34. Soybeans 60 cents under at $11.39. Cargill Cedar Rapids 20 cents under on corn, $4.49. Soybeans 30 cents under, cash price $11.69. 5-Star Co-op Nashua 33 cents under on corn, $4.36. Soybeans 66 cents under, they're at $11.33. Lincoln Way Energy Nevada 29 cents under on corn, the cash price $4.40. ADM Des Moines 25 cents under on soybeans, their cash bid $11.74. At New Co-op in Red Oak, they're 33 cents under on corn, $4.36. Soybeans 60 cents under, $11.39. Mid-Iowa Cooperative Green Mountain 46 cents under on corn, cash bid $4.23. Soybeans 76 cents under, $11.23. New Co-op Sheraton 32 cents under on corn, $4.37. Soybeans 60 cents under, cash bid $11.39. Walk-On Feed Ranch 47 cents under on corn, $4.22. Soybeans 70 cents under, $11.29. New Co-op Glidden 38 cents under on corn, $4.31 for the cash price. Soybeans 60 cents under, $11.39. Innovative Ag Services Farley 46 cents under on corn, $4.23. Soybeans 69 cents under, cash bid $11.30. And Cargill Muscatine 22 cents under on corn, $4.47. Soybeans 32 cents under at $11.67. Cash, corn, and soybean bids are subject to change without notice. Always check with your local elevator when making sales to obtain the most recent price. And that's been a check of your basis numbers here on Iowa Ag Matters. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this message.
Every county fair has that special person or family. They are there before the gates open and long after the lights go out, helping families with projects and pitching in wherever they're needed, never asking for recognition. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, along with Wiffles Hybrids, is honoring them with the Heart of the County Fair Award. 6 winners will be recognized locally and at the Iowa State Fair, with a plaque, cash prize, VIP passes, and food coupons. Don't delay. Nominations are due June 1st. Visit iowaagnet.com to nominate today. Well, of course, the Farm Bill, a big topic of discussion here on Iowa Ag Matters, and that will continue now as Dustin joins the team at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to discuss the Farm Bill and some of those priorities that NCBA would like to see in the Farm Bill, and they get into that more. Here's Dustin.
I am with Sigrid Johannes with NCBA. Thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you.
All right, so Washington's abuzz, farm country's abuzz. The Farm Bill should be hitting the House floor hopefully by the end of the week. Everybody and their uncle's got something in there that they're really watching for. what's NCBA mostly concerned about that hopes to get across the finish line with the House?
There's a ton in there that's useful for cattle producers. Frankly, a lot of it is in Title II, things like reauthorizing CRP at 27 million acres, things like protecting the 50% livestock carve out under EQIP. There's also a lot in there that makes sense in terms of codifying good recommendations that we got in the dietary guidelines, reinforcing a few key risk management programs, and just getting the Farm Bill done, frankly. There's more in this one that is relevant for our crop folks, but at the end of the day, you need a strong farm economy. You need a strong, landscape across the board for all of our inputs and for all of our neighbors to be able to, have a rising tide lift all boats. So we got a lot of the things funded. A lot of our money-focused asks were addressed in reconciliation last year, but we're still taking a vested interest in this bill because, again, it's still got some of those pieces like EQIP that we need. And more importantly, it's really important and long overdue for all of our row crop folks.
I was going to say, because many farmers that are raising cattle also raise corn, soybeans, and the food and the grains that feed them. So obviously that's going to be beneficial for those operations overall.
Exactly. In most, parts of the country, especially in the Southeast and in the Midwest, you've got people diversified. They're working in a number of different businesses. But even if they're not, even if you're in a really, cattle exclusive area, like in the Mountain West, for example, you're still using those inputs. It all comes back around sooner or later. So we believe in this bill, and we're really supportive of the version that passed out of the House Agriculture Committee with bipartisan support last month. We're currently working through the 500 plus amendments that have been submitted to that bill. But we really hope we are very positive on that underlying text. So we really hope that something as close to that as possible is what ultimately gets to the House floor this week.
I know one of the things, I know it deals with pork usually, obviously, like that Prop 12 situation. Obviously, if it can happen to them, it can happen to cattle, it can happen to any business. How close are you watching that, and how much support you kind of give on behalf of livestock producers all across the country to get something like this taken care of?
Extremely closely. So that's actually what we've been working on the most since that amendment portal opened. We are extremely adamant that the Prop 12 fix language that made it into that, again, committee passed version of the bill has to stay in the bill. That is extremely important in this Farm Bill. It might be the most important thing, frankly, for cattle country in this bill, because on top of those funding and those program pieces, this is a precedent-setting exercise. This is our last opportunity to really say once and for all, after the Supreme Court decision, after the ballot initiative in California, this is our most definitive chance to say, nope, if you are a livestock producer in Nebraska, in Iowa, in Georgia, in Nevada, all you have to do is comply with your state's laws and with federal law. And beyond that, it should not be up to the voters of New York or California or anywhere else to tell you how to raise your livestock. So it's extremely important to us that that language stay in the bill. There are multiple amendments in that batch of 500 that strip it out at this point. And frankly, we're lobbying really heavily against those, because if anybody is willing to take that out, that's a pretty firm signal to us that you're not really that serious about protecting the rights of farmers and ranchers in the middle of the country. You're really kind of looking at those folks who voted on that ballot initiative in California, many of whom are really heavy donors to a number of members, and saying we care more about that than we do the cattle producers in our district.
So outside of Farm Bill, what kind of policy things are you guys keeping a close eye on right now?
We're definitely keeping a close eye on New World Screw Room. This is something that unfortunately has been creeping closer and closer to our border. It's now roughly 62 miles south of the border with Texas. Getting to work there on continuing to just educate producers and make sure that our response plan is sound. For some of our heavier feeding states up and down, the middle of the country, that's been a really big discussion. Is like, what are movement restrictions going to look like? What would inspection requirements look like if we have a case in Texas? And so that's something we've been working through both with APHIS and with our state vet partners to make sure that we're striking that really important balance between being aggressive enough to limit the spread of an outbreak, but also flexible enough that business and our supply chain can continue. We don't want people going out of business or waiting or delaying, that journey of beef from gate to plate in the event of an outbreak. So that's something we're focusing on really heavily this spring.
Hi, my name is Ethan Smith, and I've been a certified crop advisor in Iowa for about 6 years. The Iowa CCA program is valuable to me because it helps keep me informed on new topics and research around the industry, including soils, insects, diseases, and much more. It's also a great way to network with others around the state and beyond. Iowa is known for its crops, and that's why we're here. To learn more about becoming a certified crop advisor, visit iowacca.org.
Well, Mark, among the things we were talking about here over the weekend was, of course, the weather. Now, we only got about 0.4 of an inch of rain, which is, first, I can't believe we're saying it's the first showers we've seen in a little bit. Not that anybody's complaining. Definitely heard a lot of farmers that were wrapping up their planting. I know there's a field right in the middle of Ankeny along Orlabor Road where I drive in every morning, and that field actually got planted on Friday night over the weekend as well. And so definitely seeing some progress made. A lot of people are finishing up here, and of course, just in time for the rain and to get done. And again, about 4/10 of an inch. Now they're talking a lot of heavy rain and possible hail here tonight. And of course, that's always a danger in the springtime when those plants are young and coming out of the ground, that we could run into some hail.
That is certainly true. And I'm going to be interested to see those planting progress numbers, just how far we jumped ahead again after this past week. As you mentioned, it wasn't terrible weather last week in terms of severe weather or rain slowing things down to an extreme amount by any means. And then, like you said, yes, today we are looking at potential storms again in the state of Iowa. Now, it is to the point where those plants that are emerging out of the ground not going to be too heavily affected by any high winds, but really the hail is the factor that we have to look out for here today. And in some instances, could be some pretty large hail, and that can certainly damage the crop even at that very early stage. So that will be something that we will keep an eye on today, in addition to those planting progress numbers.
Yeah, and we did have some storm activity. We heard of some tornadoes out in Nebraska, and so definitely, hopefully, not too much damage out there. But Riley Smith even told us about a barn that had gotten some damage. An historic barn got hit by a lightning strike, I believe it was, and we'll have more details. I'm sure Riley will have more for us here, maybe in another edition of Iowa Ag Matters. We can get him to jump in and talk to us about that. More Iowa Ag Matters in a moment.
Every county fair has that special person or family. They are there before the gates open and long after the lights go out, helping families with projects and pitching in wherever they're needed, never asking for recognition. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, along with Wiffles Hybrids, is honoring them with the Heart of the County Fair Award. 6 winners will be recognized locally and at the Iowa State Fair, with a plaque, cash prize, VIP passes, and food coupons. Don't delay. Nominations are due June 1st. Visit iowaagnet.com to nominate today. This is the Midday Market Update on Iowa Ag Matters. I'm Mark Magnuson, joined at midday by Justin McKinney of Comstock for the Midday Market discussion. Justin, what's happening with the trade in the grains, as we've seen quite a bit of green on the screen this morning?
Rocket ship higher right off the bat last night at 7 o'clock mark. Right now we have this July corn up 20 cents at 4.75 and 3/4. December corn is up 15.5. Soybeans trading 38 3/4 higher on the July contract. November beans trading up about 33 cents right now. Wheats are trading 16 to 25 higher depending on the class. A lot of news that started yesterday got the market fired up as the White House announced their fact sheet on the Chinese trade deal. We were very disappointed with the news that came out of the Xi-Trump summit on Thursday as everybody went home, assumed that there was not much of a deal made. However, we find out yesterday that China did agree to purchase at least $17 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products in every year up through 2028 right now, on top of the commitments it made last October for the 25 million metric tons of soybeans. So we don't really know product. We don't know volumes on each individual commodity. But overall, it is very positive for the market. And we do have that E15 bill sitting, going to the Senate right now. How that unfolds on the vote remains to be seen. But quite a few positive things trading in the row crop market here today.
What's happening on the livestock side of the trade today?
Yeah, mixed trade on the cattle. We had that positive cash trade all week last week. So therefore, we expected the market to open up higher today. It did open up higher. Right now, feeder cattle are trading about 10 cents higher in the May contract. August through November, trading down anywhere from $1.67.5 to $2. A lot of concern there. You look at the corn price, you look at the things that could affect the cattle market moving forward. That is obviously one of the huge factors in feeding cattle. Therefore, those deferred months kind of slipping a little bit. We'll see how the rain shakes out. Also, probably driving that May feeder board as much as anything in the nearby. We have a cattle on feed report coming out on Friday. So average estimates right now are about 102.1% on feed, 108.3% placed, and 90.6% marketed. That isn't the full range. That's just the preliminary guesses. So we'll see how that affects the feeder cattle market towards the end of the week.
Farmers, stay on top of your local market with Basis Matters from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. Every day, we bring you the latest corn and soybean cash prices from inland grain elevators and river terminals across Iowa. Get the prices you need to make the best selling decisions, no matter where you are in the state. Basis Matters connects you to the numbers that matter most to your farm. Tune in every weekday only on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network and make informed grain marketing decisions with Basis Matters.
July corn up 20 1/4 at $4.76. December corn up 15 3/4 at $4.96 3/4. July soybeans up 39 1/2 at $12.16 1/2. November soybeans up 33 3/4 at $12.04 1/2. July soybean meal up $3.70 at $3.38. July soybean oil up $1.82 at $75.70. On the Merc, June live cattle up 58 cents at $254.48. August feeder cattle down $1.45 at $3.60 even. June lean hogs up 20 cents at $98.95. That was a check of the midday markets on Iowa Ag Matters. I'm Mark Magnuson.
Well, back on Iowa Ag Matters, and like as we said before, the livestock market's a little mixed here throughout the morning, and of course, it's been an interesting couple of days of those cattle and hogs. Teddy Tarvis, once again, of Allendale, continuing that market conversation with our Mark Magnuson.
On the other side of the markets, what's happening with the livestock trade?
Yeah, absolutely. You got the cattle right now up about 80 cents on the fats. Feeder's currently down about 70 cents. But there's still a little bit more excitement with China there because they did renew their export licenses that haven't been active for quite some time now. So that is something to consider. But then on the flip side of that, it was announced too that we were going to start to import Argentine beef, or at least a little bit more. But now, so we're still awaiting some details on that. But for now, again, it is looking pretty good for the cattle. So I would think that we continue to move a little bit higher, assuming we get more details on that. But higher to start the week, so we'll see if we can get some follows through support once we get the box beef numbers and things like that. But things are looking pretty good all across the board here.
And that is interesting because we had heard from U.S. Beef, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, various groups talking over the past year or two about being locked out of China in terms of U.S. beef and getting those exports over there. So that is obviously big news. But as you mentioned, then, is it just offset a little bit because of the Argentine news?
I believe so, yeah, because you also had Friday's afternoon box beef. Choice was up 180, select up 25, so it's nothing really too market moving. But the feeder index, the preliminary feeder index, is also a little bit lower here to start. So you do have some offsetting news, but I do think that with this Chinese news alone, I think that this is a market that is poised to go higher because once you start seeing some of that activity, whether it's going to be over the next couple of weeks or couple of months, or if it's all the way out into next year, I still think that you have the lowest cattle supply we've had in 75 years. And so there is still room for this thing, I believe, to keep moving higher. But still something to consider is getting hedges on when you can, because at some point, these prices we're at are almost, I don't want to say too high, but I think everybody knows that there is some room to make a correction here. So,
what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch for more marketing information?
Yep, absolutely. You can reach me directly at 815-578-6173. And again, this is Teddy from Allendale.
Teddy Tarvis of Allendale, my guest here today for the opening market discussion. Thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your week.
All right, thank you very much.
In rural Iowa, we know you're sold on your local radio station. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network partners with local Iowa stations to deliver the latest in agriculture news, including grain elevator prices, market reports, and ag policy news. Trusted local voices, trusted ag content. This message is brought to you by your friends at the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
You're listening to Iowa Ag Matters on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and another week, another big batch of news to talk about here on the show after President Trump's meeting in China this past week. And what we do know, Dustin, is that it did not produce a full trade deal, those discussions. Nothing that is in any way a certainty in terms of a signed deal or anything that is put fully to paper, at least not yet. And it's kind of being looked at as, I think, more of a good faith deal. I would say kind of a handshake agreement. But I would say coming out of what we know so far, that it looks good on the surface for United States ag products. And that would be reflected what we saw this morning in the ag marketplace. And some of the things that we do know based on news reports is that the U.S., so this is the U.S. side, of course, so keep that in mind, saying that China will buy, it sounds like about $17 billion per year of U.S. ag goods. That's for 26, 27, and 28. And that applies across the spectrum of U.S. ag products. Now, where the questions come in is how central are soybeans, for example, to that number? What are we going to see in the way of additional soybean buys? And it does sound like that previous, again, handshake agreement still in place for the 25 million metric tons per year in that soybean target through 2028. But we got no specific announcement in terms of new soybean tonnage. So there's still a lot of questions on the grain side. And then on the livestock side, some very good news in the way of U.S. beef being opened back up in that marketplace.
Yeah, that is good news there. We got that information very late last week that those registrations were reprocessed and everybody was able to do business again with those U.S.-led processors over there. But again, I want to stress, and this is something you kind of hinted to here and we talked about it earlier, this is a handshake agreement. It means it's not enforceable. And that was kind of like what we saw with phase one of the trade deal back in 2020 and also in phase two. Phase two really never came to fruition. And so that's a problem we have here. Now, the problem, the good thing about that is maybe we can start these purchases sooner, whereas a formal trade agreement can take years, 2-3 years to get processed before they can get something written down that both sides can agree to, and hopefully minds don't change in that time. Where the handshake agreement, you can get some stuff done faster. But again, you don't have the fact about, like I said, no way to enforce it. And that again is kind of going back to some of that TPA stuff, the Trade Partner Promotion Authority that Congress is supposed to have, but hasn't renewed it for quite some time since the Biden administration. And so there's a lot of confusion over who controls the shots in these negotiations. And obviously the president going over there trying to get some more sales for the broader economy as a whole, not just for agriculture, but agriculture, obviously a big sticking point. And soybeans, that is going to be an interesting question because these are mostly political purchases. China doesn't need the soybeans right now. They did earlier this last year when they were kind of recycling their stocks that they keep on hand in an emergency situation. They freshen those up every couple of years, and so that's when they were needing it, and that's when they would have been a better trading partner for us. But then they weren't in the market at the moment, or we weren't in the market for them in the moment. And with Brazil's harvest, they've got access to all the beans they could ever want right now. As we've said before, Brazil, they're heavily invested in that country and increasing the infrastructure there as well. So there's a lot of positive points, but you've got to really take this with a grain of salt. And there's a lot of slippery slopes on this that could go badly at any given time. But right now, it's a step in the positive direction. Hopefully, get some of these tariffs relieved as well.
And that was the other point I wanted to bring up is that hopefully both sides were, working towards reciprocal tariff reductions. And based on some of the news reports that we've read, that was a discussion. China could pull back on some of those soybean tariffs. And that would make a big difference because that would allow private Chinese soybean crushers to come back into the marketplace, not just the state buyers. So that would open things up quite a bit. And we know that those tariffs were the big barrier over the last year in 2025. It wasn't demand necessarily, it was those tariffs. So that's going to be all the details that we need to continue to sort through. We'll have more Iowa Ag Matters as we wrap up the show next. Every county fair has that special person or family. They are there before the gates open and long after the lights go out, helping families with projects and pitching in wherever they're needed, never asking for recognition. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, along with Wiffles Hybrids, is honoring them with the Heart of the County Fair Award. 6 winners will be recognized locally and at the Iowa State Fair, with a plaque, cash prize, VIP passes, and food coupons. Don't delay. Nominations are due June 1st. Visit iowaagnet.com to nominate today.
In rural Iowa, we know you're sold on your local radio station. The Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network partners with local Iowa stations to deliver the latest in agriculture news, including grain elevator prices, market reports, and ag policy news. Trusted local voices, trusted ag content. This message is brought to you by your friends at the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, where Iowa Ag matters.
And that's going to put the wraps on today's episode of Iowa Ag Matters. Of course, you can follow along with all the developments we find out from this trade situation at iowaagnet.com. You can also find full replays of all of our podcasts and MarketCasts as well. For Mark, for Riley, and for you, thanks for being with us today. You're listening to the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.